When I first started living on my own in Southern California, I was broke. I didn't have a car, I was skinny because I didn't have a lot of money for food, and unlike a lot of my friends, I didn't have the privilege of just hitting up my parents for cash. They were broke too, and they also needed money to survive. So to save money on expenses, I had roommates. And for most of my adult life, I have shared a room with at least one other adult. At a couple points in my life, I even shared a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 other people. Don't ask me how. Now, if you're like me and you're living in an area with a high cost of living, chances are you're going to have to live with at least one roommate. But believe it or not, living with a roommate actually can be awesome. It just requires a little extra work up front to make sure you're all on the same page. So with this in mind, here are my 4 tips for living with roommates. Tip number 1, make sure that you and your roommates are compatible. I cannot stress this point enough. If you want a stress-free roommate experience, it is very important that you and all of your roommates are compatible. Now, ideally, you and your roommate will already be friends, but just because you are friends with a person doesn't necessarily mean that you would make great roommates. In fact, I've lost friends because we weren't compatible roommates. So before you sign a lease together, make sure you schedule a conversation beforehand and iron out all of your expectations. And be honest. For example, are you a messy person? That's fine. I'm messy as hell, and I found roommates that were just as messy, and we've had a great time together. But it's very important that you're honest with both yourself and your potential roommates so you know what to expect ahead of time. And if you're going to live with a stranger, that's fine. I live with strangers as well and have had great experiences, but try to do as much internet stalking as you can, and don't be afraid to ask for references. And if you have mutual friends, don't be afraid to reach out and ask them some questions. Tip number 2, create a contract with a set of expectations. I cannot tell you how many terrible situations I've been in that could have been prevented with a simple roommate agreement. I know it seems kind of awkward to try and get your roommate to sign a contract, but trust me, you're going to save a lot of pain and heartache if you just get this out of the way up front. At the very least, your roommate agreement should map out how your rent should be split, how the security deposit and utilities should be split, and how the process is going to work when one roommate decides to move out. But if you can, I also recommend taking the time to include household rules as well. So for example, if your roommate has a significant other, how many times are you comfortable with your roommate having that person over at your apartment? How far in advance should your roommate let you know if they're going to have friends over for a party? And when is it an appropriate time for your roommate to play loud music? Now, if your roommate decides that she's going to stop washing her dishes, there is no court in the United States that's going to hold her accountable. But if your roommate decides to dip without paying her rent or her utilities, this roommate agreement will give you grounds to sue. Tip number 3, make sure that every single roommate is on the lease. Now, obviously, if your roommate decides to dip without paying her share of the rent, you're still going to be responsible for covering her portion, but because she is on the lease, she is equally as liable if the rent is not paid. So this is going to give her an incentive to fork over the cash and make sure that rent is handled. Tip number 4, automate your shared expenses, because there is nothing as annoying as constantly having to nag your roommates to pay you back for your shared utilities or for rent. And this is where Zenly comes in. So the Zenly team reached out to me to see if I would be interested in trying out their free app, and honestly, I'm pretty impressed. Now, the way that I typically do shared expenses and rent is I'll go ahead and send a request through PayPal and ask my roommate to cover their share of utilities or rent. But with Zenly, what you can do is you can actually schedule out your payments ahead of time, and for rent, what they'll do is they'll collect the rent money and actually send a check or an electronic transfer directly to your landlord. Now, that's a really big selling point for me, because the way that I currently do rent is I actually have to physically schedule out every 3 to 5 days before the first of the month to make sure that my electronic transfer goes to my landlord on time. But with Zenly, they actually do all of that stuff for you. So all you have to do is let them know, okay, my rent is due on the 1st, and they'll ping you at the appropriate time to make sure that your check or your transfer gets there on time. Now, another cool thing about Zenly is they actually manage household appliances with your landlord. So for example, if your dishwasher is broken, all you have to do is contact them through Zenly, and you can upload pictures and add comments, and your landlord can submit updates, and they'll keep a record of all of the updates for that specific appliance that needs to be fixed. So if you're like me and you have a landlord who loves to procrastinate when it comes to broken appliances, you know that that is super helpful. So right now, Zenly is only available in the United States, but if you're interested in using the app, they're actually doing a free rent giveaway. So if you pay for rent using the Zenly app, you'll be entered to win a month of free rent. Pretty cool. As always, thank you so much for watching my video, and let me know in the comments below if you also have tips for living with roommates. And until next time, I wish you all progress and prosperity. Take care.